Hello, my name is Shanae Trudeau, and I'm here with my teacher, mentor, and friend, Bhavani Maki, for another episode of the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. We want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We understand that your time and attention are so precious. So thank you for choosing to listen to another conversation from the heart. If you like what you hear, please tell a friend. And as always, leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes or the podcast application of your choice means so much to us. We thank you for spending your time with us today. Bhavani, I've got some questions for you.
All right. I'm ready, I hope.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, they're great. So, my first question is about big emotions, particularly working with strong emotions such as anger, betrayal, depression, and jealousy. And I would love to hear your thoughts on what does Patanjali say? What have your and what do your teachers say? And what has been your own life insights around working with strong emotions?
Yeah, this is a great question. And, there's kind of debate whether he speaks about emotions per se or just the motions of
Mm.
consciousness. And really, he doesn't say much. He doesn't say they're good or bad. It's only when we get stuck there. And the fact is that, even speaks about the more complex of an organism, the more intensely they're going to feel pain, the more intensely they're going to feel longing, etc. So it's part of our humanity and our nature. Where it gets tricky is, when someone isn't really living the teachings, when they really haven't put their heart into it. And then it becomes like, that part of us is trying to understand our emotions with our mind. Certainly, we need to use our rational aspect to navigate them, but we know that if emotions are repressed, it results in a lot of imbalances in our health. So it's about how we can navigate our emotions, how we can embrace them and really not be in conflict. There's even this sense of like the buddhi, which is like the good self, the conscience. And then there's like that part of me that needs reforming, and thinking that these two, that one can raise the other. To some extent, that's true. But the fact is, life is going to work you over and it's going to melt you down. And, something we've spoken about before is that, even this idea that we can surrender ourselves, we can. Um, when we even realize that, then surrender happens spontaneously. So, what I'm loving about this fourth chapter is that, yeah, we have to put in our work, and there's that sense of upaya pratyaya, the yogic vitamins, which is the way that the lessons come to us. And we're lucky if we have a mentor, because they're going to help us see that we have this skill to meet what arises within us and in life. But it's often in a roundabout way. So Patanjali says, when you just get ideas around the emotions, that's when it's problematic. And anger and frustration, some say they're secondary emotions. But then when you look at Plutchnik, who we've referred to before, he says every organism, you know, it has these basic biological impulses that present as physiological changes, and that anger is one of these primary things. We could see it as, frustration is when we attach a story to it, but we need to get agitated when we aren't being met somehow. There's an indication that something isn't working, and the way we've been going about it hasn't been working. So, I was just even reading about how people who say they don't have anger, it's a red flag.
Mm.
It really is, because in some ways they've like cut off that part of themselves. Our challenge is to not, because if we repress it, it's going to come out sideways. And I was just talking to one of my dear friends and big sisters, Elise, and she speaks about staying in your love space,
Mm.
which Patanjali talks about in Sutra 133 as chitta prasadanam. And so it's like knowing that, like, yeah, there's going to be ripples that arise because we're sentient. And, we would be lying to say if we didn't have fear, because fear our fear is a fear, right? It's the insecurity. And we would be lying if we didn't have anger, because there's that frustration and it's a basic impulse. We'd be lying if we didn't have sadness. We'd be lying to ourselves. So really, to allow these emotions to move us. And what she calls it, chitta prasadanam, is staying in your love space.
Mm.
So can you feel that these are all many forms of love? And when I think of the tradition, remember that Patanjali isn't, he was, um, he had many fields in which he expressed himself. There was Ayurveda, and there was, the art of eloquence, and there was yoga psychology and dance as well. So, there's many ways that we can express and move energy. Um, and in the Bharatanatyam tradition, which is the classical Indian traditional dance, a big part of it is the rasa, or the flavor, and that there's 108 different looks of love. I'm so fascinated by that.
Mm.
I did a little research, but it's really one of those things where no, you cannot pull it up on the interweb, because it's an indigenous tradition. And it's something that is given to you over time, where you have that direct connection with the teacher. So I'm not privy to that because I haven't invested myself into it. And it is a very arduous tradition. Um, I went and saw a recital once in the Jagamohan Palace, which was amazing. It's where Krishnamacharya taught, BNS Iyengar and Patabi Joyce. And, it was it's like the Maharaja of Mysuru gave him this palace, and it was like for art exhibitions. And this woman danced, and she had like a 3-hour recital with heavy bells on her ankles and her arms up in the air, and just didn't stop. And there was no exertion in her face except for the moods, the rasas that she was trying to convey. And you've been in a relationship a long time. There's at least 108 looks of love. All those moods, but maybe we can see love as the umbrella, and chitta prasadanam as being the staying in that love space. Otherwise, it comes out sideways as hostility, as being controlling or manipulative, or, a forked tongue. So, in the sutras, and again, this is all part of that tradition where some people have written to a certain extent, the commentaries. But again, it's more of a transmission. And even then, the transmission only really lands until we've had the experience or we can relate it to our experience. And so there's the kalusha, which almost sounds to me like colluding, and this is where it's like there's an ulterior motive. So raga would be this sense of attachment. First, we're attracted to something,
Mm.
It like fits the bill of our idea. And somehow, they say we fall in love with each other's projections. It's so true, isn't it? But there is also, it's like in the myth, there's truth underneath that. So we fall in love with the vision and the potential. And we go, oh, this is someone who gets me and I get them. And we have like a kind of the same, um, epistemology or deeper feeling. And then and what we're really attaching to is their samskara, their patterning and their vasana. Perhaps we couldn't heal a relationship with our parents, and then we think, oh, this partner, I'm going to heal this part of this glitch in relationships or this unmet desire. And it may happen to a certain extent, but you will get worked and you will have to die and you will have to let go and then realize like, okay, I didn't get it all, but there are some good things, and either be content with that or say, wow, that was interesting, thank you very much. Let's keep going, and whatever that looks like. So then what happens is, you know we then, if that like loving gaze and attention or the limelight begins to fade, then there's what's known as irsha, which is where we have envy that they maybe have something that's deeply interesting to them, or we're jealous that their attention is focused on another. This is classic in when couples have babies. We didn't really have that.
Mm.
But where it's like I mean, there's moments where it's like, why are they so understanding of this kid, but they're not understanding of me? So yeah, it's not black and white, which is our next sutra in the Kaivalya Pada. Or in life, we recognize that people are given recognition. Maybe they show up as, I don't know about in your marriage, but like my husband shows up really differently for people in the outside world than he does for me a lot of times. And that's not totally on him. But we like, there's this outpouring into the world and we come home and sometimes we need to take time for ourselves, and have that acceptance. But, in other relationships that aren't intimate, we see where people who we know the deeper layers of them, we know that we spoke about it yesterday in the mentorship, where we become victims of the charisma of someone else because they're using their charisma to fill this bottomless pit inside of themselves. So those charismatic teachers. And so recognizing that like people get recognition all the time, even though it's just what Edwin Bryant calls it cheap show-offs.
Mm.
They're not really raw or really honest, or even their raw and honesty is kind of a ploy, but who's to say?
Yeah.
So, really seeing where there's hidden agendas and we're feeling unseen. And really, we only feel envy if someone has success when we don't care about the other person. So, that's something maybe we've been burned. And then, oftentimes what will happen is that then there's a sense of frustration, in ourself, like, why am I not being recognized? Why am I not being adored? And our thinking becomes unstable and lopsided, and we don't see the greater context. And then when they have some kind of a challenge or a fall for grace, or maybe we start to withdraw from them and create this dvesha, this separation, like, you're not paying attention to me. Fine, I'm not going to pay attention to you. And we maybe put up walls, and maybe part of that, it's not right or wrong, but part of that is like, okay, I need to focus on myself. I need to see where I've been relying on this other person and I need to fill myself. Um, then we might have Schadenfreude, where we're like, yeah, now you're getting a taste of your own medicine.
Mm.
So Patanjali calls this the emotional wheel, and I call it like the toxic spiral. So, I think like this is where life is going to work us, and whether, as a child, I remember being a child and like kind of coming into, a big part of school is the socialization aspect, and realizing that like not everybody thought I was as wonderful as my parents did or gave me as much attention as my parents did. And you kind of realize, wow, I'm not the center of the universe. So there's like that honeymoon phase and that dissolution. So, it's not anything that we can block because that's toxic. We don't, if we block it, we're going to project it or transfer it, or it's going to eat us alive from the inside out. We just have to kind of reconcile with this and realize, all right, like this is natural and this is the nature. And even that, like, when you really realize that, like, everybody goes through this in some way, and that's what Patanjali says, like, even freedom doesn't mean that you don't experience these things. You just don't obsess in them in the same way. And you don't go through all these manipulations in the same way. It kind of develops this you realize the tenderness of your humanity, and um and having acceptance for self. It's not even so that you can feel better about yourself or somehow become more spiritualized or become something you're not.
Right.
So it's our human nature. But then also to realize that, like, that's only one part of the picture. It's only one part of the picture. And then there's almost like, okay, I don't really, even this idea of yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, like, where so many translators say, like, learning to control. I mean, certainly we don't want to, lash out or self-flagellate, but it's about a, seeing a bigger picture and being in that fluidity, that there's something really beautiful about it, and what Patabi Joyce, with all his faults and charismatic abuses that he committed, he, and I don't know where he got it from. I should have asked him, but the sweet pain of being alive, right? This is part of it. And we're just being peeled back and peeled back and peeled back. And yet, it's that sense of like, there's so many layers with ourselves. So, and I feel, and I felt this in myself, and it's one of those like frictions and growing tensions is like that we should somehow have it together. That and it was really interesting. I love I love Drag Race. I love it. I love watching these queens and the art of their cross-dressing, etc. And one thing that RuPaul said is, because when you put straight people in drag, he said their true selves often reveal with the mask. So as much as we may wear a mask, parts of ourself are actually being revealed. And it, kind of reminds me of what your teacher Lee Lazowick said. Who am I kidding? Like, I don't have control. So that's the sense of the Tao, that like life is unfolding us, life is going to work us. Um, Even the sense of a mirror, where our mind and our heart is a mirror and it reflects everything. It can't hold on to anything, and yet it can perceive and experience it all. So there's really not an answer in any of that, but maybe it's that sense of control, which is our issue. And of
Yeah.
course, you can't know what control is until you feel a sense of control or feel out of control. And then you realize that, you know, it's so much bigger than you. I mean, it's an incredibly humbling experience. Something, that I've been watching Nico go through, as he's had his fall from grace and he's starting to realize, it's not just about having friends, and being loyal to friends who aren't always loyal to him, is, like what's been playing out at recess is that they have these soccer games and all of the really athletic and go-getter kids have decided that they would all be on the same team, and the other ones, so there's like 7 of them, and then the other 3 are put on the other team, which Nico is a part of, and they say no, it's totally fair, and they broaden their goal by 1 foot, and they break all the rules of like sportsmanship where they put the ball directly in front of the goal and just kick it in. Like, you cannot win.
Yeah.
And I'm like, always fighting for the underdog. I'm like, but that's not fair. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to you could just say, I'm not going to play. And he said, but mom, then I don't get to play. So whatever, and it's
Wow.
where it's just kind of, yeah, it's huge, and, I also have to be careful. He's so Piscean that he doesn't have this martyr complex, but it's kind of like, in some ways, well, that's what came up in yesterday's sutra class. I think you had to go, but at the end of it, it was this sense of like acquiescence to
Yeah.
another. And what came to heart for me was aqua essence.
Oh, wow.
And that we can, um, just because we have to give in at times doesn't mean that we give up our essence. But like it said, water is the strongest influence because it will always find a way to flow. And, I think of like Moab, where you have these rock formations that have just been sanded down into these soft, undulating shapes, and you can see all these layers. So that was something that came to heart for me. That part of us which is like maybe self-righteous, but that we can advocate for our emotions, because and even having a confident, and this is rare. It's so rare to find somebody who can hear us and not try to fix us or tell us that we're being overly emotional or dramatic, um, but who can just listen and feel us with a deep compassion and see our wholeness.
Mm.
Because again, there's that sense of like, oh, I shouldn't have these emotions. And if I just chant this mantra, or if I just do shoulder stand, I won't have the bandwidth to hold on to anger.
Yeah.
The point isn't that. The point is that you get back to that substratum of your essence, which realizes that, okay, these are emotions. They're waves. They're part of the ocean, but they don't define the ocean. But the ocean also, by nature, has waves. Any of that make sense?
Oh yeah, I have so many thoughts on this, but one of the points you keep returning to is the distinction between, sitting on our pain or sitting on our emotions versus just sitting with it. And so finding that healthy way not to repress them and not to take them out on other people or ourselves, but to kind of ride the wave. And this whole piece of, really working with the whole body of yoga. So, it's the study piece and the practice piece in and through the body and the social piece, because it shows up in relationships. And we're still, I mean, I know this from spending many, many hours and, weeks on retreat alone by myself. Emotions still come up, even when I'm not in contact with other people. And so really working with that, takes a lifetime.
It does, and it's that sense of tapas as catharsis, you know. And I think, I'm not sure if I shared on the podcast or it's all a blur, but in one of the Yoga Sutra online study things, which by the way, people, like if this interests you, I really invite you to take the next leap, because this is a community of conversation, of real conversation that is advocating that what you maybe felt like was something you needed to tuck away and create a little like emotional or psychological cyst around, which festers. There's affirmation and there's sharing in that occurs in deep bonds. It's like, come on, like, this is where this is just the schlag, as they say in Yiddish, which is the whipped cream. I mean, if you want the cherry and you want the fudge and you want the whole sundae, this is where we really go deep, and there's so much learning. I'm just holding the center, but it's such an incredible community, not necessarily of deep yoga sutra studiers, but of real people.
Yeah.
Who are just real.
This is our commercial break.
Yeah, this is, no, I'm serious.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, we're just like the treatment that we're giving. If this is interesting to you, um, you know, that's where the juice really is.
And
Um,
can I say something about that? Because I
yeah,
will say I wanted to just make a plug for the mentorship program and the deep, I feel it is people that do, we are scholars of a sort, that we're taking this on, not that we know it through and through. And, it's helpful to keep beginner's mind in all of it. And at the same time, so many questions are answered through this. And for me personally, learning the Yoga Sutra as you present them is one, it's a very feminine approach, which I appreciate. And it's a non-dogmatic approach because it's really talking about this fluid nature and more in line with just, like you said, humans. It's not, over spiritualized humans. It's not the high and holy set. It's like this. It's like working with emotions, working through the body, working in relationships. So,
and as you say that, it's kind of like, that question, like, if you could have a conversation with anybody in the world, who would it be? It would be that group.
yeah.
I mean, I can say that in authenticity, and it's enlightening,
Yeah.
because we don't have to carry this stuff and feel some kind of a way and that we should have it all figured out. But when it's reflected back to us and mirrored back to us, it helps us to see it and hold it without holding on to it. It gives us a larger context. So going back to catharsis, one thing it was like one of those rabbit trails that happened with the sutra. We were looking at the sutras on tapas and the ancient Greek tradition of the dramas, which are, mellow, not meaning me like yellow mellow, but meaning like mega dramas in which worst case scenarios happen. Okay. um and that, these players would wear masks, and they were kind of almost gruesome in the affect, the presentation. It was like taking that emotion to its most blown up udara expression. And that the point of these dramas was to stir the hearts of the audience so that they could express them and emote them, rather than carrying it as some kind of festering fear.
Mm.
So it's like really like, getting in touch with that, and also realizing like, oh my God, like when somebody else goes through something terrible and you go, oh my God, that's so terrible. Thank God it isn't me. I mean, that's part of our humanity. We can touch it, because when we don't touch it, that's when we, as Patanjali says, we become flat.
Mm.
Then we, it's like Martine Prechtel speaks about the praise and the grief. When we don't allow that, when we're not moved by these things, we're not going to revel in the divine ordinariness, which the present is so small it can't be measured. It's already slipping into the past. And even realizing, that the unknown future, oh my God, could this happen? And the past, they're only defined by the present at the same time. So there's really no way around it. We have to go, life gives us all kinds of initiations. And I love that you're asking about this Sutra 133, because I have been belaboring it in my writing. I
Let's
mean,
go there. Yeah,
oh
if you
my
would.
God. I mean, I'm on like edit number 12, and, writing this because it's complex. We're complex, and then add the complexities of somebody else and navigating that. Um, there's no cookbook,
Yeah.
as much as we want a cookbook for things.
So this is my next question, is speaking about Sutra 133. I'm going to do my best here. Maitri karuna mudikto pekshanam sukha dukkha punya punya vishayanam bhavanati chitta prasadanam. And you often refer to this as the social sutra. So in terms of working with our interpersonal relationships, and also this practice of peace. I can't remember when you said it, but you were illicit that like peace is an active practice, and it's this way of creating healthy boundaries, and in my words, for deeper self-love. And I'd love to hear you speak more on this.
Yeah, I mean, life, we're pack animals, and the treatise of the Yoga Sutra is soteriological, which means it's about how we can still find freedom when, as Patanjali says, the world is sticky and there's so much residue. And, how can we move in a way that still has juice in it, in which there's still some joy in a world that burns to the touch? So navigating social dramas, and whether or not, this is so mirrored in yesterday's sutra too, that like so much of what we're doing is based on residue. And the more we're working from residue of past experiences, the like more complex it becomes. So how can we get in touch with original creative mind and self, which is capable of has many layers and has many different approaches? And again, there isn't a cookbook, there isn't a recipe for every situation. So in some ways this sutra is really helpful. In some ways it doesn't go far enough, right? Because we just, all we can do is all we can do is learn, and we learn through, okay, that didn't quite work, and all right, I learned something about myself, or I learned about that other person. So some relationships, just the nature of life, we have to have just to eke out a life. We're going to rub shoulders, we're going to be with people that we wouldn't choose, whether it's our family of origin, or the projections have died in the relationship and now you have a kid, and what do you do? Like, what's the bigger picture? What did you sign up for? So as much as he gives, like Satchitananda calls it the four locks and the four keys,
Mm.
um, But, when I was reflecting on this, I was like, in my relationships of decades, I've had these experiences with any one person. You can't pigeonhole these things. But he talks about like, where your energy is best utilized, what's constructive, and how you can, because your energy and your confidence and your intimacy is a precious gift. And how often have we given it to others who haven't treated it as a precious gift, who rejected it? And I was just reading, oh my God, this is such a deep statement, that part of us is afraid of showing our true self because it's all we have. And if we were to show it and it would be rejected, we'd have nothing left. Whoa.
Oh,
Isn't that
wow.
intense?
Yeah.
So, Patanjali also says, like, we do need veils.
Yeah.
This is the world of nature. And so being able to navigate, this idea of like the oneness that already is, that's true. But that doesn't mean that you, invite everybody into your inner sanctum. So how do you find people who are worthy? I mean, that's even a weird loaded word, but who are aligned or in resonance with you. And he says, look, have a sweet spot, sukha, for those who, make people your friends, maitri, who have like the same kind of sweet spot and tenderness as you do, where they really have the, that sense of feeding something wild and holy for the future generations. And they really feel themselves as, like many indigenous traditions believe, we have a debt to Mother Nature. Everything that we're doing, like the way that we sustain ourselves, that animal gave up its life or its egg, or that plant gave up its seeds. We are part of this greater reciprocity. So people who really have that kind of deeper sentiment and are in touch with it, they're not entitled. And so they really want to be a part of life's beauty making, and they really want to revivify the sacredness in the world. They can see that. And oftentimes those people are the ones who really get burned. It's such a lesson, isn't it? I know for me it was, because I could see the beauty in everybody, and therefore I did not choose well. I was not choosy with my boyfriends or my friends, and I got burned a lot, and ended up like being the sacrificial lamb a lot of
Mm,
times.
mm,
um, so, those people are the ones that we want to make our friends. For those who are suffering, and there's people who seem to be constantly suffering, and certainly our friends will go through those periods, but if it's just a constant downward spiral in which they're asking you to continuously intervene for them, or it's a manipulation in which they're, like, oh, I just can't do it on my own. Oh, well, how can I help then? It's like they have this very underhanded way. Um, we're either are going to be enabling them, or we're going to often insert ourselves into their lives unbidden, and it's seen as interference and as meddling. So for those people, there's compassion, but that compassion has to come out of being in touch with our own vulnerabilities. These are spontaneous. This is staying in the love space, just like with a friendship. Trying to be somebody's friend, you just naturally feel like, wow, this is somebody I want to be around, right? And they're very special because they're chosen in your lives. Those who are suffering, it's like being in touch with your own suffering helps you to hold them in compassion, as opposed to enabling or meddling or taking on their pain.
mm.
Like the Buddha says, learn to weep with one eye. Okay. And then you have Maitri Karuna, mudita. I got to think about this for a second. Um, those who are virtuous, and we kind of spoke about this with Irsha, um, being able to praise them instead of feeling envy, you know.
Mm,
And if we feel envy, it's an indication of like, wow, have I not really been developing myself, or have I somehow cut off part of myself in order to lift somebody else up? Or am I measuring myself against another person? And when we praise good behavior or benefit, it feeds our own goodness and our own godliness. So, you know, it does come from a sense of self-esteem, which is earned, which is facing your own challenges. And it's described like, again, it's a spontaneous outpouring. None of these things can happen though unless you're in touch with your own emotions and your own longings and yearnings and your own deepest drivers, right? That love is pushing you forward, not that you're not enough or unworthy. And we will feel that way too. You can't feel your own worth until you're in touch with where you feel unworthy. That's like that sense of grace. So, in the same way, where you see something magnificent, like I always think of Niagara Falls or, you know, the green flash or a sunset, you're just like, wow, that's incredible. It's a spontaneous thing where you recognize this. But we often measure ourselves according to another.
mm,
And then the one that is really challenging is the upeksha, which means neutrality, but translated etymologically, upa means near, closely, and towards, and iksha means to see in the proper context. And so, and that is for someone who is apunya. This is the person who uses their charisma narcissistically, or who is manipulative, or who is entitled, or who basically is deflecting, is, you know, bleeding all over someone else and isn't taking responsibility for their own pain or their own hollowness. And so they're the pot stirrers and they're the instigators. And oftentimes, you know, it could be somebody with a personality disorder or which is a product of unmetabolized trauma.
mhm,
So, you know, neutrality, don't get enmeshed with that person. Don't try to school them or fix them or be their teacher. Let them be your teacher. What part of me feels like I need to be the savior?
mm,
I need to be the one who's going to give them salvation, and realize, you know, the root of the word salvation is salva, which is healing.
mm,
So, you know, we can use it as a teachable moment and then just not like it's tricky to, because sometimes it's like we don't see it, especially personality disorders. It can take a long time for them to reveal. And especially if you have that capacity for compassion and empathy and friendliness, you know, there's a part of us that does that is really caring, but we can become enmeshed in that. So can we like take back our projections and give them their projections and own our own sense of like self-righteousness or needing to prove ourselves and really be neutral? Like, what does that mean? Like that, you know, when someone is just like laying into you, you know, where like narcissism and borderline personality, and everybody has a certain degree of narcissism, but they have a way of deflecting
mm,
so that when you hold them accountable, they somehow turn it back on you. Or when you, and then, oh my God, when you create a boundary, they become like a crazed, vicious, rabid animal.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to not withdraw and fear and feel attacked, and because you are being attacked, but how can you take your power back? And sometimes we don't have the choice. Sometimes those people we have to rub shoulders with them.
Yeah.
So all of these things can happen within any given relationship, really. And stay tuned for the next manuscript where I unpack that further, you know. But if we can hold on to our love space and really, according to last week's sutra or yesterday's, Tatra Jnana Jamana Shayam, that's where yoga helps us to, because the more we think about it, the more complex it can be. So we need to be rational. But I don't know about you, I can be really rational about things. It doesn't always help because the feelings are there.
Yeah.
So that's where I can, lay face down and, with some props on me or supports on me, and just feel myself drop in and let go of the story and just go back into that essence of what it feels like just to let it be. And that's a wisdom that is a somatic wisdom. And then in that place, a new, like a bigger existence or experience can hold that. And we can remember, like, wow, we might hear a bird chirping, or we hear a gecko on the wall here, who's laughing at us. Oh yeah, there's a bigger world than all of that. And I can actually, like, instead of making that situation the defining point, like according to the sutra prior, we feel ourselves as the hub in our existence, and we can open many different branches, but the headquarters is within that love space, and we can open and close branches at will. And just remember the good qualities of the other person, and just be like, wow, this relationship just seems to be like, we're, what do they call them, like trauma bonding, or
Mhm.
a toxic, the kalushas, the emotional wheels. And I'm not there yet, they're not there yet, I don't understand. I'm going to focus on self-care, or I'm going to focus on, building relationships in which there's mutual care, and there's freedom. Like, just like the job of the teacher is to set the student free, and a good friendship, like
Mm.
in those, and they're very, very rare, aren't they? Right? Where it always feels like coming home, and you can be yourself, um, without shame, and without, sharing the frictions that are in your life, without feeling like you're encumbering somebody or burdening them, but really a form of atonement, of confession. And they love you, they see what's beautiful in you.
Potent things. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share from, working with emotions? I mean, they just go so hand in hand with our relationships and the things that come up. So,
That tranquility, it's a full-time job,
yeah.
and this is the antidote to moodiness. And we know from the metrics given by Harvard and what Patanjali shared that, we tend to focus on the misgivings and the shortcomings in life, certainly on others and within ourselves. But, that's where yoga, in a really practical sense, gives us that expanded capacity for capacity, where we have a nervous system that can hold it all. And then holding that vision, that space for the vision that, like, this too will pass. That And what Patanjali says is that spiritual growth happens almost imperceptibly. So these are the growing pains. And, that's where it's so wonderful to have like intergenerational relationships, because the people who are older than us, who are really real, they've been worked and they've been humbled. And you see that somehow they got through it. So, we're not running away from discomfort, and we're not running towards discomfort. It's going to find us. And what discomfort does is it keeps the door open so that grace can come in to help us integrate, the I will eat, I will be eaten, our humanity, and then also realizing that there's a larger continuity. And that's what I love about, like spiritual lineage, because it just gives me a bigger context. And it's not about guru worship or adulation, but like, wow, so many people have been through this, I mean, that's really at the heart of like these religious practices. They were all been tested. They've all been burned. They've all been betrayed. And that's where, you know, we can't deny that there is a higher power that is moving through us. So, how can we find rest on that moving current, and know that we are, it's like that sense of the cocoon where the poisons of consciousness become their own cure. We're morphing into something that we don't know what it is. But we can look at nature and just go, wow, look at the resilience there. There's something really beautiful happening. Why would it be any different for me?
Thank you so much.
So Kaivalya, seeing things as they are and not getting bogged down by them. And emotions, keep it moving. Yeah.
Until next time.
Until next time, ahui ho, aloha nui, big aloha to everyone. May you breathe the breath of life. Thank you.
Thank you.